Hello and welcome to Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. It's your one-stop shop to take stock of all the progress on the political and literal battlefield. Now let's go ahead and get started. Leaders from Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, the Vatican, and the United States have gathered in Apulia, Italy for the G7 summit. The top issues being discussed at the meeting include bolstering Ukraine's defense capabilities and the country's reconstruction, both of which have already seen major breakthroughs.
A major outcome of the summit is the unified pledge to provide additional military aid to Ukraine. The G7 nations have collectively agreed to send advanced weaponry, including air defense systems, artillery and ammunition, to enhance Ukraine's defensive capabilities. US President Joe Biden has also signed a 10-year-long security agreement with his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, aimed at easing Kyiv into a future NATO membership. The summit attendees pledged billions of dollars in aid, targeting infrastructure rebuilding, restoration of essential services, and economic recovery. The leaders of Japan and Ukraine have also managed to sign yet another 10-year-long security agreement on the sidelines of the summit. G7 leaders also announced an innovative agreement to use profits from frozen Russian assets to aid Ukraine. A loan of $50 billion will be provided to Ukraine from the interest accrued on these assets, marking a significant step in leveraging Russia's financial resources to support its invaded neighbor.
You should keep in mind that there's a European support of 50 billion euros, there's the American support of $60 billion, and now comes on top a G7 package of $50 billion. And the message is also that it's not the European taxpayers that are paying for the damage that Putin is causing with his war of aggression, but it is Putin.
As the G7 nations reaffirm their solidarity with Ukraine, the measures announced in Apulia reflect a comprehensive approach to supporting Ukraine's immediate defense needs, long-term recovery, and integration with Western organizations.
Ukraine's bid to join the European Union has gained significant momentum, with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen advocating for the initiation of accession talks with Kyiv later this month. The call for negotiations marks a pivotal moment in Ukraine's long-standing aspiration to join the European Union, a goal that has become more urgent in the wake of Russia's aggression.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed von der Leyen's comments, expressing optimism about Ukraine's future in the bloc.
Today we talked about Ukraine's European integration, about our expectations for this June. Ukraine has done everything it needed to do to actually start negotiations on our country's membership in the European Union, and it is in June, very soon, that we should receive approval of the negotiation framework and actually start negotiations.
The proposal to begin accession talks has been met with a mix of enthusiasm and caution within the EU. While many member states support Ukraine's membership, recognizing it as a strategic move to bolster European unity and security, others urge a careful, criteria-based approach to ensure Ukraine meets all necessary conditions. Ukraine has made notable progress in aligning its policies with EU standards, particularly in areas such as governance, rule of law, and anti-corruption measures. However, the ongoing conflict poses significant challenges, including the need for comprehensive economic recovery and a stabilization of its political landscape. As Ukraine pushes forward with its European ambitions, the potential accession talks highlight the broader geopolitical shifts in Europe, underscoring EU's commitment and supporting countries on the front line of democratic struggles.
A Russian military ship docked in the port of Havana this week. The arrival of the vessel, which is reportedly carrying advanced weaponry and military equipment, signals a deepening of military ties between Russia and Cuba. It's also an answer to the United States' decision to allow Ukraine to use American weapons to strike Russian territory.
Russian officials have described the deployment as a routine mission aimed at strengthening bilateral relations and enhancing regional security cooperation. A spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Defense said the visit underscores the enduring friendship between the two countries, a sentiment shared by Havana locals.
We come to visit to see the ships because, well, I studied in the Soviet Union, I know the culture, the country, and this is a common occurrence. For many years, those ships in one way or another have visited us periodically.
However, the United States views the presence of the Russian military ship in Cuba with apprehension. US officials have expressed concerns that this move could represent a strategic escalation in the Caribbean, reminiscent of Cold War-era tensions. The US has called on Russia to provide transparency about the ship's mission and intentions, urging both Moscow and Havana to avoid actions that could heighten tensions. Analysts suggest that this development may complicate US-Russia relations further, especially given the ongoing conflicts and geopolitical rivalries between the two nations. As the situation unfolds, the international community remains vigilant, watching for any signs of further military buildup or escalation.
Now it's time for a quick news flash of the latest events surrounding the war in Ukraine. Let's look at the most recent developments of the Ramstein Group, Ukrainian power grid, and more.
In a significant policy shift, the United States has lifted the ban on sending weapons to Ukraine's Azov Brigade. The unit had previously been subject to restrictions due to concerns over its nationalist affiliations. However, US officials now emphasize the urgency of providing comprehensive military support to all Ukrainian forces. In another development, Argentina has joined the Ramstein Group, a coalition of nations committed to supporting Ukraine militarily and logistically. The inclusion of Argentina marks a significant expansion of the group's global reach and solidarity. Meanwhile, Ukraine is grappling with widespread blackouts caused by the extended repairs of several nuclear power units. The outages have disrupted daily life and raised concerns about the country's energy security. Ukrainian energy authorities have stated that the repairs are essential for maintaining the safety and efficiency of the aging nuclear infrastructure.
And now it's time to take a quick look at the situation along the front lines in Ukraine. Of course, down in the south in Kherson, not much to report except that Russia continues to terrorize that city from just across the Dnipro River. Now let's turn our focus to Kharkiv. That's where we've been focused the last couple weeks, ever since the Russian offensive in early May was launched, primarily on the cities of Vovchansk and near Lipsy, trying to encroach upon Kharkiv, trying to get within artillery range of the city to terrorize Ukraine's second largest city even more and break the spirit of Ukrainians in this part of the country. Of course, we had a major decision of the United States administration and other countries allowing Ukraine to essentially strike the Russian territory along the border with Ukraine in an attempt to go ahead and hammer the stationing of forces as well as equipment and ammunition over on the Russian side of the border. This week, it seems to be paying off somewhat as attacks on Kharkiv have been reduced, and there is progress reported, limited progress, I must add, being reported by Ukrainian armed forces. Near Vovchansk, fighting for the center of the city and beyond still continues. And of course, near Lipsy, the situation still remains, well, rather dire. However, there are no reports of new Russian advances further into Ukrainian territory. City of Kupyansk, of course, and in the Kupyansk region on the border with Luhansk and the Kharkiv region, Kislivka and Berestova, two small villages that have been captured by Russian forces over the last week. Of course, the situation around Kupyansk also remains hot. We're going to hear about that in just a little bit, so bear with us. Now, if we look down previously what we saw down near Chasiv Yar and the Avdiivka area, let's see if we can get that up here. Konstantinivka, Chasiv Yar, of course, Chasiv Yar, oh, we have a slight problem with this map, but Chasiv Yar, one development to report here over the last week is that Ivanivsky, which is just between Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut, very key node of transportation. Well, Ukrainians say that they still have control over that city. Russians saying that they have control. That's been contested. Earlier, we reported on Ukraine this week that, in fact, the Russian forces did control the area. I just wanted to highlight that that is a bone of contention, if you will. One of the consequences of the offensive up in the Kharkiv region is, of course, the situation down near Avdiivka. Russian forces pushing in multiple directions and making gains, territorial gains in several directions there, as Ukrainian forces are concentrated on the Kharkiv region. Well, that's it for this Frontline update. Let's go ahead and look at some images from the front lines, and we'll be back in just a minute. The former mayor of the city of Kupyansk in the Kharkiv region of Ukraine was pronounced dead at a Russian hospital this week. The news comes just days after an assassination attempt was carried out by Ukrainian military intelligence.
Уважаемые жители Украины.
American news agency News reported that Gennady Matsagora was facing charges of treason in Kiev following his not-so-patriotic approach to governing during the first months of the war. The former mayor of Kupyansk collaborated with Moscow, leading to the capitulation of his town and occupation by Russian soldiers. In June 2022, Matsagora publicly announced the signing of a document on the creation of the occupation administration of Kharkiv. The city was later liberated by Ukrainian forces during Kyiv's first wave of counterattacks in September 2022, prompting the traitorous mayor to flee to Russia. Matsagora was shot at his safe house in the Russian Belgorod region. He was rushed to a nearby hospital in critical condition, where he was pronounced dead just a few days later.
And now it's that time of the show to look at the war in Ukraine through a journalist's lens. Today I'm joined by Ukrainian producer and volunteer originally from Kupyansk, Denis Tsyba. Denis was also knew the former mayor. He also is an advisor to the current head of the military administration, which is the de facto mayor. Hello, Denis. Good to see you. Thanks for joining me on Ukraine this week.
Hi, Donald. Hi, Donald. Good to see you too.
Good to see you. Now, we just showed this piece about the former mayor of Kupyansk. I believe you knew him. You grew up in Kupyansk. So what can you tell us about this former mayor?
Yeah, I knew that man. Actually, I can't say something bad about him in pre-war period. He was a nice person and he did a good things to our city, to our sport development in Kupyansk. Like he support all types of sport, and also he did a lot of good things for business in the city. But this one decision to support Russia, to give them access to the city and to support them in the future, given the occupation period, that's like destroyed all good things about him and all good minds about him. Of course, he had some people who was agree with his decision, because as I know, he explained that I decided to give the city to Russians because I don't want Kupyansk to be destroyed.
Right.
But again, for me, that's nothing, because you may give the city and step back and live normal life, but you decide to support them and to help them reach Kharkiv and other areas. So for me,
Yeah, well,
that's not an explanation.
It's a difficult decision. I mean, Kupyansk is right there on the border. It didn't have much choice, and so I'm glad we're talking about this. If we look at the mayor of Mariupol, for instance, he fled the city. And here, this mayor, well, he cooperated with the occupation authorities, and I think that's probably the big issue here, right? He also
That's the biggest issue.
Yeah. So, but it's also my understanding that when Kupyansk was being liberated, he fled to Russia. Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. He and all top staff of administration, like mayor, regional, let's say director. This Vitaly Ganchik, he was the chief of Kharkiv region administration under the Russian control. All of them, they ran away from Kupyansk in 2 days before our forces got into the city.
Yeah, so Denis, tell me, you were in Kupyansk recently. What does the situation look like there since the Russian offensive in Vovchansk and Lipsy?
Situation in the city, directly in the city center, let's say, it's pretty stable. Time to time, Russians use rocket launchers, they used howitzers. 2 days ago, they used FPV drones directly to the city, and one person was wounded. They hit the transit bus from Kupyansk to Kharkiv, but that wasn't direct hit, direct strike, so everyone inside were good. But still, they're using weapon directly to the city, but mostly situation is pretty hard across the river. If you know, Kupyansk is located on 2 sides of the river Oskil, and that side closer to Lugansk, let's say east side of the city, it's a pretty hard situation because under the shell time to time.
Well, hopefully Ukraine continues to hold on. It seems like they're holding on to Kupyansk pretty well. Well, Denis Tsyba, thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine this week. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
The Ukraine Recovery Summit convened in Berlin this week, drawing global attention to the country's efforts to rebuild amongst the ongoing war. Leaders and representatives from over 50 countries gathered to discuss a comprehensive plan for Ukraine's reconstruction, emphasizing infrastructure development, economic revitalization, and humanitarian aid.
Key topics at the summit included the allocation of financial aid, strategies for rebuilding critical infrastructure, and measures to ensure transparent and effective use of resources. The European Union, the United States, and other major donors pledged significant financial support, with the EU committing €5 billion over the next 2 years.
Bombs continue to fall on our cities and villages, hundreds and hundreds every week. 80 bombs on Sunday, 55 on Monday, and every day this destruction continues, plus missiles and drones. As long as Russia is not deprived of the opportunity to terrorize Ukraine, Putin will have no real interest in trying to find a just peace.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also held a high-profile meeting on the summit's sidelines. Scholz reaffirmed Germany's unwavering support for Ukraine, both in terms of financial aid and military assistance. Meanwhile, Zelensky expressed gratitude for the international community's support and stressed the importance of sustained aid to ensure Ukraine's long-term stability. With the Recovery Summit concluded, international attention is now turning to the upcoming Peace Summit in Switzerland, scheduled to begin next month. This summit aims to address broader geopolitical issues and foster dialogue between a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Notably, China has been actively lobbying other nations to endorse its peace plan, which includes a ceasefire and negotiations based on mutual security concerns. China's involvement underscores its growing role in international peacekeeping efforts, though its proposal has received a mixed response from Western countries, who remain cautious about its potential impact on Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. As the international community rallies behind Ukraine's recovery, the dual efforts of reconstruction and peace negotiations highlight the complex and multifaceted approach needed to address the ongoing crisis.
And now joining me to discuss the culmination of these two events this week is Andreas Umland, political scientist from the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Hello, Andreas. Thank you for joining me on Ukraine this week.
Thanks for having me again.
Yes. Now, concerning this Ukraine Recovery Summit in Berlin, we see literally dozens of these summits, really focused on the reconstruction. But actually, isn't that putting the cart in front of the horse somewhat? Do you think so many summits should be focused on reconstruction right now, when we really need to get Ukraine in a position to regain its territory? I think that should be our priority.
Yes, clearly the military aid is the priority, and there are different formats for that. The famous Ramstein meetings are one of them, and there will also be the NATO summit at which this will be discussed. There are the security agreements that Ukraine is currently signing with numerous countries. Just signed 2 new large security agreements with the United States and Japan. But recovery and civilian help is also a topic, and there is now the series of conferences, first in Lugano, then in London, now in Berlin, that is dealing with this issue. And there's now also, what I observe, a change of approach in that this recovery and the civilian help for Ukraine is not any longer postponed. And people understand that we cannot any longer postpone that to after the end of the war, and that we have to now already help Ukraine to rebuild, to recover, and that this cannot be made dependent on the situation at the front, whatever was decided.
Right. Well, we've seen since the Russians fled the Kyiv region, we've seen Bucha and Irpin, Hostomel. We've seen those reconstruction going on there, a lot of money being put in. But I think as far as reconstruction is concerned right now, one thing we could concentrate on is critical infrastructure. Perhaps that's something that we can repair now. But I mean, if we look to the east of the country where cities are completely decimated, I think we need to end hostilities before any reconstruction in those areas can take place. Now, concerning this Ukraine Recovery Summit, there have also been some criticisms that Berlin has somewhat made a festival out of the event with thousands of participants and side events. Is this a good thing to involve more people? Maybe it is.
Yes, I think what I, at least here in Berlin, heard from the Ukrainian participants that they like the summit, because it included civil society, and it was a really large conference. It's now the largest conference solely devoted to Ukraine, outside Ukraine, at least, with over 3,000 participants. and it had a large part of the conference was devoted to civil society and to also business issues. And the side events as well. I've been to some of the side events, are useful. And there was, one could say, in Berlin, this week was a sort of a Ukraine week with lots of things going on at the same time. And I think that's good. And it helps, of course, for the networking between different actors. And I would actually hope that perhaps the next such conferences will be even bigger and perhaps involve even more actors, for instance, more Western businesses, more Western NGOs, so that there will be then many little projects coming out of this, and not just talk about the big money.
Right. Now, there's also, did you notice there was maybe a lack of representation on the behalf of Ukraine? Apparently, the Minister for Reconstruction's been dismissed, so there was no representation there. The head of the Reconstruction Administration was not allowed to leave Ukraine. Are the Ukrainians sort of shooting themselves in the foot as far as representation goes at big events like these?
I have to say yes. This absence of a minister for infrastructure development, there is no minister currently, is a problem, and also the problems within the National Agency for Recovery and the withdrawal of Mustafa Nayem, the previous head of this agency, from the delegation, and then he resigned. Are unfortunate developments, one has to say, and they have not been discussed in the official part of the conference, but they were a topic of discussion. These are internal political battles that Ukraine does not need right now, although perhaps that is also unavoidable in a way. The country is at war, and the fight for funding for budgetary assignations is, of course, very tough in such a situation. And that's why there's a lot of tension, of course, within the Ukrainian leadership, where to allocate the few resources that Ukraine has, and how to organize the rebuilding, the recovery, and which ministries get how much support. These are all also in peacetime complicated issues, but for a country at war, dependent on Western help and with little tax income, this is, of course, even more complicated.
Right. Now, looking forward to the peace summit that's taking place in Switzerland, we hear that in the communique, it seems like, according to sources like RFE-RL, for one, that have seen the communique that's already drafted, it should include representatives of all parties being present. This is after this summit is done. What do you think this summit will achieve? Will it get us closer to getting sides to sit down, or is this still a rally point for countries in the global south and around the world? We've got over 90 countries that will be present. Is that still going to be Ukraine's strategy to get its point across to the international community?
Yes, I think that's the main function of this summit. It's called Peace Summit, but unfortunately we cannot await peace. Putin has actually just outlined his conditions for peace. It's not just that Putin can keep what he has occupied currently in Ukraine, but he's actually demanding that Ukraine would withdraw from territories that are currently under Ukrainian control and that are Ukrainian state territory, and hand it over voluntarily to Russia, and a few other strange demands that he has formulated.
Yeah, he wants Zaporizhia, Kherson, all of the Donbass, and I don't know, maybe a bonus would be Kharkiv, but I think it shows we're just oceans apart.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kharkiv was not mentioned, but he wants a territory that Russia does not control, and that Ukraine should voluntarily give away, which is of course in a way understandable, because according to the Russian constitution, there are there's a lot of territory that is not controlled by Russia, but that Russia, according to its constitution, regards as its state territory.
Right.
These are territories, of course, of Ukraine.
Right.
So this is what Putin expects, and therefore to have a peace conference with him right now makes little sense. The purpose of this meeting in Switzerland is to inform basically the so-called global partners beyond the traditional Western allies of Ukraine, sometimes also called countries from the global south, from Latin America, Africa, and Asia, what the Ukrainian peace plan is, what the situation in Ukraine is, and to rally their support for a just peace, for the Ukrainian peace plan. And the particular topics that will be discussed in Switzerland weekend will be nuclear security, food security, and the reversal of the deportation of Ukrainian children. Supposedly or presumably, these are all topics where also countries which may not support Ukraine so much geopolitically, and that which may have other general, international preferences, but maybe they will also support these three issues, and they can understand why Ukraine wants to implement them.
Right. Andreas Umland, Political Science, Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine This Week. The Ukrainian army isn't holding back anymore. It's been directing more of its firepower at Russian bases located in Moscow's own backyard. All throughout this week, reports have been pouring in of successful Ukrainian strikes against Russian air defenses and communication centers. Let's now have a closer look at what Kyiv has managed to accomplish in its new strategy.
These are Su-57 fighter jets, the pride of the Russian Air Force. The latest reports from Ukraine say that Kyiv's forces have managed to damage 2 of these top-of-the-line machines. Now, this would be an impressive feat, since Russia heavily guards such prized equipment. But to make matters worse for Moscow, the 2 jets in question were struck nearly 600 kilometers away from the Ukrainian border. Another success for the Ukrainian army has been the destruction of Russia's newest field communications station. Such stations are vital in coordinating the operation of troops. And while this will help disrupt the Russian war effort in some areas, it is only the slightest of stepping stones towards victory. No one is more aware of what is at stake than the Ukrainians themselves.
Shall we stand silently by the side? It is not how this all works. They started the war against us, not the other way around.
And the Ukrainians are not standing idly by. After the US greenlit strikes against military targets on Russian soil using Western-provided weapons, they have been quick to act. This has been a long time coming in the minds of many Ukrainian soldiers. Using HIMARS such as these, the Ukrainians have decimated Russian air defenses in the Belgorod region across the border. There is a reason why Ukraine has been targeting Russian air defense in particular: the long-awaited F-16s. Basically, the Ukrainians are making sure that Moscow has as little means as possible to oppose this aircraft. This operation involves more than just infantry. The Ukrainians have also been using their artillery and attack helicopters to far greater extent than before. As for the jets' arrival, well, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense is quite optimistic.
Yeah, hopefully very, very soon.
Very, very soon, like next week, next month?
Hopefully very, very soon.
Until the F-16s are in the pilots' hands, the Ukrainian army will continue to impede the Russian war effort with any means at its disposal, clearing the way for what might hopefully be a breakthrough.
And now joining me to discuss the huge potential that Ukraine could have on the battlefield is General Ben Hodges, retired former commander of U.S. Army Europe. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for the privilege.
It's great to have you. Now, the freshest thread we have is the U.S. and Ukraine signing off on a bilateral security agreement. And, well, according to this agreement, there's something that strikes my eye. I don't know if it strikes yours the same, but it says it clearly states that America supports Ukraine's efforts to win this war. Is this the first potential step in the right direction, that we're defining the scope of what we want for Ukraine?
Well, it's better than this nonsense of, we're with you for as long as it takes, which was an empty statement. But still, I don't know why they can't say in plain English, it's our objective that Ukraine wins, because it's in our strategic interest that Ukraine wins. And we're going to do everything necessary to ensure that Ukraine wins. So they still have a hard time saying it as clearly as I think is necessary. But yes, it is better than what it was.
Do you think that due to the upcoming elections, perhaps in November, that it's just kind of like one of those political footballs or a hot potato that nobody really wants to deal with until the election's settled and done with?
No, I think that actually there's a lot of people in the Congress, Republicans as well as Democrats, and around the U.S. that are fully in support of Ukraine and recognize how important this is. And the Biden administration deserves a lot of credit for what it has accomplished over the last couple of years. But where we have failed is to clearly identify the strategic outcome. And that's why you've had so many bad policy decisions or incremental decision making, and we still haven't provided what's necessary to win. Or you have this this policy that allows Ukraine to use ATACMS, the 300-kilometer range ATACMS, across the border, but only in very specific certain places, which still leaves over 80% of Russian territory as sanctuary from which the Russians are killing innocent Ukrainian civilians. So we can't seem to overcome this excessive fear of Russia possibly using a nuclear weapon, which I think there is almost zero possibility of that. But the administration, and also I think in Berlin, they are hamstrung on this.
Certainly, and then we have Russia's so-called response, sending its navy to ports in Cuba, saying that it will arm America and the West's enemies with more capable or long-range weapons. Is that something that we should be concerned about?
No, absolutely not. In fact, the people that need to be concerned are anybody that has recently purchased Russian-made equipment. I mean, we're watching in real time Russian air defense systems that are totally failing to stop Ukraine from attacking throughout the depth of the country with drones or ATACMS and everything in between. So Russia's defense industry appears inept. So people that should be worried are those who are thinking about buying it or those who make it and sell it. And these 3 or 4 vessels that have sailed to Cuba, this, for me, is a great opportunity to watch and learn. That's why the U.S. Navy and the Canadian Navy have been shadowing them, watching what they do, so you can learn a little bit from it. But really, it's a reminder that the Russian Navy cannot go up into the Black Sea because Turkey, our ally, enforcing through its authority of the Montreux Convention, does not allow Russian warships to go up into the Black Sea. While I'm sure that the sailors on those vessels are much happier to be going to Cuba instead of up into the Black Sea where they would surely be killed, I imagine that the Russian Navy would much rather have them there in the Black Sea.
Well, I would imagine if you're in the market for an S-300 or S-400 system, based on what we saw in Crimea with the ATACMS taking those systems out, that's got to be a deal killer for anybody wishing to purchase those systems. What are your thoughts about that? That American systems from 1986 can take out the most advanced air defense of Russia?
Well, that's a great point. Almost all the technology that the United States has provided to Ukraine is equipment or weapons that were developed in the 70s and 80s. I mean, you're talking about ATACMS, that's 80s technology. Patriot, that's 80s technology. The Bradley fighting vehicle, those were developed in the late 1970s. So so much good equipment is turning out to be, when in the hands of Ukrainian soldiers properly employed, to be very effective against what Russia has because of the quality difference, but also the quality of the people involved in this.
Is there any more modern system that you could foresee in the hands of Ukrainians would not only save their lives, but they could, with their ingenuity, could operate these systems and would potentially maybe even be a game changer for the situation that we're currently seeing?
Well, it's less about platforms and more about commitment. I mean, if the President of the United States and the German Bundeskanzler would come out and say, it's our objective that Ukraine wins, and we're going to do everything necessary to make sure that it happens, you would see much better and more rapid enforcement of sanctions. And you can see that the Russians are already struggling significantly, even though sanctions have not been very thoroughly and consistently in place. And then you would also see Germany would drop their resistance to providing Taurus, and I think the U.S. would open up and find more capabilities that can be provided. I think it's shameful that F-16s are still not flying there yet. That's a decision that should have been made 2 years ago. But again, this is what you get when you don't have a clearly defined objective. You typically will not have consistently good policy.
Or results. Now, concerning those F-16s, Ukraine has been complaining that the training made available by the United States for its pilots, I believe it lately said that it has about 30 pilots or so that are ready for this training, but there are no such places in the United States to do this training. Obviously, that's got to be frustrating. But I think the first question I'd like to ask about the F-16s is when they do become available for Ukraine to use, how effective will they be?
So, you know, this question about pilot training is I think, BS. I heard a gentleman from the White House last night say, well, you know, there's not enough Ukrainians to speak English. Yeah, well, if we'd have started 2 years ago, there would have been plenty of Ukrainians that would have reached a level of English competence in order to be able to fly. But again, because we waited so long, and now to say, well, there's not enough, and it's also a matter of priority. If this was a priority, there would be plenty of seats available for Ukrainians pilots to learn to fly the F-16. But it's not the priority because we haven't explained what our objective is. We haven't, and this is the hard part, by the way, for civilian leaders. It's always very difficult to clearly identify the strategic objective, the aim. What is it that you want to accomplish? But that has to be done before you start investing billions of dollars or sending troops somewhere. It's difficult to do, but it's essential. Now, F-16s, you know, I suspect that the Ukrainians, when they do actually employ them, they'll be very smart. They will want to build up experience. I mean, it's one thing to learn to fly it. It's a different thing to fight the aircraft as part of an operation in a heavily contested airspace. And so I would imagine they'll start off doing certain things to build up confidence and figure out how to do this to gain combat experience. But I could imagine them being involved at chasing down shooting missiles, being a part of the overall air defense system designed to protect Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian infrastructure. So they would be useful there. I would imagine at some point Ukrainians will have their own version of the glide bomb that could be launched from an F-16. So there are several roles where the F-16 will be useful, but we should not expect to see the sky full of F-16s,
right,
all at once. I think they will use them where they get the best effect.
And finally, we just have a little bit of time left. I'd like to ask you about the reposition of this Patriot battery from Poland to Ukraine. Do you think it'll be sent to the east? And if it's sent to the east, do you think the Ukrainians will be able to use it above Russian territory?
Well, I hope they will if they need to. I mean, you know, there's never enough air defense. I mean, that's been the case since the beginning of air defense. You can't possibly cover everything that needs to be covered. And so there's always a requirement to prioritize. And this is where the leaders have to say, okay, the most important thing is we've got to protect, whether it's infrastructure, power generation, whatever it is, these have to be protected. This is a normal process. So I imagine they'll put that Patriot where it's needed the most. And certainly, if they have the chance to shoot down aircraft or missiles over out in Russian airspace, I hope they'll do it.
All right, General Ben Hodges, former commander, U.S. Army, Europe, and senior advisor to Human Rights First. Thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine this week.
Thanks for the privilege. Have a good weekend.
And that's all the time we have on this edition of Ukraine This Week. Thank you for watching. Check us out on YouTube, and we'll see you again next week. Goodbye.